I stood in the freezing, sterile courtroom, desperately biting the inside of my cheek to force the tears to fall. My hands visibly shook as I picked up the heavy black pen the judge offered me. With a few swift strokes of ink on the divorce settlement, I officially signed away my life. I handed over the deed to our sprawling six-bedroom custom mansion in Westlake, Austin. I relinquished the keys to the brand new Porsche Cayenne I used to drive my son to school. And, the absolute kicker, I signed away my 100% equity stake in Vanguard Elite Developments, the multi-million-dollar real estate firm I had helped build from the ground up. Across the mahogany table, my soon-to-be ex-husband, Julian, let out a breath he didn't even try to hide. He leaned back in his leather chair, a venomous smirk spreading across his perfectly stubbled face. Sitting right next to him, practically sitting on his lap in a courtroom, was Brianna, his 23-year-old marketing assistant turned mistress. She flipped her platinum blonde hair, adjusting her designer blazer, which I had bought for Julian's birthday last year, and shot me a look of pure, unadulterated pity. To them, and to the judge who was looking at me like I was the most pathetic, spineless woman in the state of Texas, I had just surrendered. I had let the narcissist win. I was walking away with nothing but full custody of my son and a few $1,000s in a checking account. But my name is Victoria. And what Julian, his arrogant lawyer, and his little home-wrecking side piece didn't know was that I hadn't just handed them a golden ticket to a life of luxury. Oh no. I had just legally handed them a financial hand grenade with the pin pulled out. If you want to know how I used a narcissist's own massive ego to systematically destroy his life, leaving him drowning in debt and begging for mercy while I walked away completely unscathed, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and grab a snack. Because trust me, this is a story of revenge served ice cold. To understand how we got to that courtroom, you have to understand the illusion Julian had spent 15 years carefully constructing. It was a masterpiece of smoke and mirrors, and for a very long time, I was his favorite prop. Julian and I met at UT Austin. Back then, he wasn't the slick, suit-wearing corporate shark with a Rolex glued to his wrist. He was just a wildly ambitious business major with a silver tongue and a dream. I fell for his drive. We got married straight out of college, moved into a tiny, cramped apartment that smelled faintly of mold, and started working on his vision. When he pitched the idea for Vanguard Elite Developments, a boutique firm flipping high-end commercial properties, I was all in. While he was out shaking hands, playing golf, and acting as the flashy frontman, I was the silent engine keeping the machine running. I did the bookkeeping at 2 a.m. I managed the payroll. I navigated the legal loopholes. I was his foundation. And for a while, it worked. The market boomed, our risks paid off, and the money started rolling in. Not just comfortable money, but Texas oil baron kind of money. Or so it seemed. As the zeros in our bank account multiplied, the man I married began to vanish, replaced by a toxic, status-obsessed stranger. Julian developed a severe case of keeping up with the Joneses, but on steroids. It started with the move to the gated community in Westlake. Suddenly, our perfectly fine life wasn't enough. We had to have the biggest house on the block to satisfy the snobby HOA president. Then came the country club memberships we barely used, the luxury cars leased under the company's name, and the designer wardrobes. As his ego inflated, his respect for me completely evaporated. The gaslighting started subtly. Whenever I questioned our insane spending habits or asked why certain contractors weren't getting paid on time, he would flip the script. "Victoria, you're being overly emotional again," he would say, using that condescending, soft voice that made me want to scream. "You just don't understand high-level finance. I'm networking. I have to look successful so investors trust me. It's an investment, but I wouldn't expect a stay-at-home mom to grasp the complexities of corporate growth." A stay-at-home mom. Those words were a slap in the face. He conveniently forgot the years I spent doing his taxes, balancing his ledgers, and building the very company he was now using to make me feel small. Whenever we were at dinner parties with his high society friends, he would introduce me with a dismissive wave of his hand. "This is my lovely wife, Victoria. She holds down the fort and takes care of our son, Leo. She's not much for the business world." I was mortified, but whenever I confronted him in the car ride home, he would tell me I was acting crazy or creating drama out of nothing. He was a master manipulator. He would love-bomb me the next day with a shiny new tennis bracelet, only to tear me down a week later, because I didn't smile enough at his investors. I was constantly walking on eggshells in my own home, terrified of triggering his explosive temper. Our son Leo, who was 10 at the time, was treated more like an accessory than a child. Julian only paid attention to him when it was time for the annual family Christmas card photo, forcing Leo to wear matching Ralph Lauren sweaters so we could project the image of the perfect, wealthy, flawless American family. Behind closed doors, Julian couldn't even remember the name of Leo's baseball coach. I was suffocating in a gilded cage. I knew the marriage was incredibly toxic. I knew I was being emotionally abused. I spent countless nights crying into my pillow and Googling signs of a narcissistic husband. But the fear of tearing my family apart, the fear of losing the life we had built, and the sheer exhaustion of fighting him kept me paralyzed. I kept sweeping his red flags under the rug, hoping the old Julian was still in there somewhere. The absolute worst part? 2 years before the divorce, Julian completely cut me out of the company's finances. He abruptly hired an exclusive, high-end accounting firm in downtown Austin, claiming the business had grown too big for my amateur spreadsheets. He changed all the passwords, revoked my access to the main accounts, and put me on a strict monthly allowance. It's for liability reasons, babe, he lied through his teeth. You don't need to stress your pretty little head over the numbers anymore. I was blindfolded. I had no idea what was actually happening with the money I had helped earn. I just saw the shiny exterior, the new Rolexes, the spontaneous weekend trips to Aspen for his client meetings, and the arrogant strut of a man who thought he owned the world. But an illusion, no matter how perfectly crafted, is still just an illusion. It only takes one tiny crack for the entire glass castle to shatter. And for me, that crack appeared on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, hidden inside a FedEx envelope that was never meant for my eyes. Like I said, the facade started to crumble on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, about 3 years before that final day in court. Julian was out of town on one of his infamous investor retreats in Miami, leaving me alone in our cavernous, echoey house with a massive to-do list. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Westlake mansion, a house that always felt more like a sterile museum than an actual home. It was cold, perfectly staged, and designed solely to impress high society people we didn't even genuinely like. I was in his home office, a room I usually avoided because it smelled faintly of expensive cigars and his suffocating ego. I was desperately tearing through the room, looking for our 10-year-old son, Leo's birth certificate for a prestigious summer camp application. Julian kept all the vital family documents locked in the heavy-bottom drawer of his custom oak desk. After 20 minutes of searching, I finally found the spare brass key hidden behind a row of thick, leather-bound business books he had bought for display and never actually read. When I pulled the heavy drawer open, I didn't just find the birth certificate. Tucked all the way in the back, buried underneath a dusty stack of old tax returns, was a thick, unsealed FedEx envelope marked with a red stamp. Confidential, urgent financial audit. Now, I've never been a snooping wife. For over a decade, I had trusted this man implicitly. But remember, he had completely frozen me out of Vanguard Elite Development's finances for months, claiming my amateur bookkeeping skills were holding the company back. My gut, that primal, undeniable instinct every woman gets when she knows something is deeply, deeply wrong, was screaming at me to look inside. My hands actually trembled as I pulled out the massive stack of documents. It was an independent audit from a ruthless risk management firm in downtown Austin. And as I scanned the numbers, my blood ran absolutely ice cold. Julian wasn't building a real estate empire. He was building a giant, glittering house of cards, and a stiff breeze was about to knock the whole thing down. The millions in our corporate accounts, gone, vaporized, replaced by a terrifying, tangled web of high-interest corporate loans, over-leveraged assets, and credit lines that were maxed out to the absolute limit. My eyes widened in pure horror as I saw the paperwork for a secret second mortgage he had taken out on our Westlake mansion. He had literally forged my signature to get the cash. He was heavily borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, barely scraping together the minimum interest payments on his commercial properties just to keep the banks from foreclosing. Vanguard Elite wasn't booming. It was a sinking ship. And Julian was just rearranging the deck chairs while the water poured in. We were essentially living on borrowed time and stolen money. But the impending financial ruin wasn't even the most devastating part. Flipping through the corporate credit card statements attached to the back of the audit, I found the exact reason why we were bleeding money so fast. Julian was expensing things that had absolutely nothing to do with real estate or high-level networking. Charge $4,500 at a high-end jewelry boutique in Aspen. Charge $12,000 for a 6-month lease on a luxury penthouse condo in downtown Austin. Charge $800 at a Michelin-star romantic seafood restaurant in Miami, dated for the exact same weekend he was supposedly grinding at his investor retreat. And then, attached to the downtown condo lease as a cosigner, I saw the name, Brianna. I felt the air leave my lungs. I knew exactly who she was. Brianna was the new 23-year-old marketing assistant he had hired 6 months prior. I had met her exactly once, at the annual Vanguard Elite Christmas party. She had batted her fake eyelashes at my husband the entire night, wearing a designer dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. When I brought up her inappropriate behavior to Julian on the car ride home, he had gaslit me into oblivion. "Victoria, you're sounding completely unhinged right now," he had sneered, gripping the steering wheel of his leased Porsche. "She's a kid right out of college. She looks up to me as a mentor. You're just an insecure housewife who doesn't understand modern workplace dynamics. Stop creating toxic drama where there isn't any. A mentor, right?" I guess mentoring now included paying for her luxury downtown apartment using our company's dwindling funds. Suddenly, the silence of the office was shattered. My phone buzzed violently on the desk. It was Julian. I stared at his name flashing on the screen, accompanied by a picture of him smiling cockily on a golf course. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shaky breath, plastered a fake smile on my face that he couldn't even see, and swiped to answer. "Hey, honey," I said, my voice shockingly steady. "Hey, babe," he replied, the sound of clinking martini glasses and women's laughter echoing in the background. "Just wrapping up a brutal networking dinner. These investors are killing me, honestly. You wouldn't believe the amount of stress I'm under to provide this amazing life for you and Leo. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated, narcissistic audacity of this man. I'm so sorry you're working so hard," I cooed, staring directly at the $12,000 lease agreement with his mistress's name perfectly typed on it. "Make sure you get some rest. You deserve it." "Will do. Love you. Keep holding down the fort." He hung up. He didn't ask how Leo was doing at school. He didn't ask about my day. He just needed to check his little box, gaslight his wife, and maintain the grand illusion before heading up to a hotel room with Brianna. That phone call was the final nail in the coffin. I sat back down on the plush rug of his perfectly curated office, surrounded by the undeniable proof of his ultimate betrayal. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was actively destroying our son's future to fund a lavish, fake lifestyle for himself and his side piece. If Vanguard Elite went under, and the audit made it crystal clear that it was only a matter of time before the creditors came knocking, all of this massive debt would fall on us, on me, because legally, I was still listed as a 50% co-owner of the LLC, even though he had locked me out of the daily operations. In that moment, a weaker woman might have folded. I could have called him back in Miami, screaming and crying into the phone, demanding answers. I could have packed my bags, taken Leo out of school, and moved into my sister's cramped spare bedroom in Dallas. I could have hired a ruthless, blood-sucking divorce attorney, lawyered up, and demanded my half of the assets. But what would my half actually be? Half of a mountain of debt? Half of a bankrupt company? Half of a second mortgage that I didn't even authorize? I realized with terrifying clarity that if I blew up right then and there, Julian would flip the narrative. He was a master manipulator. He would hide whatever tiny bit of cash was left, blame the company's spectacular failure on market fluctuations, and somehow leave me holding the bag while he walked away clean. He would drag me through a messy, drawn-out, highly public divorce, using his expensive legal team to crush me until I had absolutely nothing left to give my son. I couldn't let that happen. I simply wouldn't allow him to win. The crushing panic that had gripped my chest just moments before slowly morphed into something else entirely. It hardened into a cold, calculated, razor-sharp rage. It was the kind of absolute clarity you only get when you realize you are entirely on your own. And the only person coming to save you is you. I carefully picked up the documents and put them back into the FedEx envelope, arranging them exactly as I had found them. I placed the envelope back under the tax returns, locked the drawer, and hid the brass key behind the books. I stood up, wiped the single, pathetic tear that had escaped down my cheek, and looked at my reflection in his office mirror. Julian thought I was just a naive, stay-at-home mom. He thought I was too stupid to understand high-level numbers. He thought he could gaslight me, use my life as collateral for his massive ego, and discard me when the money finally ran out. He was about to find out exactly how stupid I really was, because right then and there, I decided I wasn't going to divorce him. Not yet. I was going to play his twisted little game, but from now on, I was going to write the rules. If you ever find yourself married to a narcissist, the absolute worst thing you can do when you discover their betrayal is confront them without a bulletproof plan. If I had walked downstairs that rainy Tuesday and slapped those FedEx documents onto the kitchen island, Julian would have spun it instantly. He would have manipulated the narrative, moved the hidden assets, and filed for divorce before I could even blink, leaving me drowning in his corporate debt. So I didn't say a word. I did the hardest thing a betrayed wife could possibly do. I smiled, I kissed him on the cheek when he got back from his fake Miami trip, and I played completely dumb. I became a master of the gray rock method. If you don't know what that is, it's a psychological tactic used to deal with toxic, abusive people. You essentially make yourself as boring, unreactive, and emotionally blank as a gray rock. Narcissists feed on drama. They need that emotional reaction, that narcissistic supply, to feel powerful. By giving Julian absolutely nothing, no arguments, no tears, no pushback on his insane spending, I became invisible to him. And being invisible was exactly what I needed to operate in the shadows. While Julian was busy popping champagne at country clubs and playing sugar daddy to Brianna, I was quietly, methodically getting all my ducks in a row. My first step was securing a lifeline. Years ago, when my grandmother passed away, she left me a modest inheritance. It wasn't Westlake Mansion money, but it was enough. Fortunately, my grandmother was a tough, old-school Texas woman who didn't trust Julian from day one. She insisted the money be placed in an ironclad trust solely in my name, effectively walling it off from our marital assets. Julian knew it existed, but he always considered it chump change compared to his grand real estate empire, so he never bothered trying to tap into it. His arrogance was my saving grace. I used a chunk of that trust to hire 2 people who would become the architects of his destruction. First, I found Evelyn. Evelyn wasn't just a divorce attorney, she was a ruthless, bloodthirsty shark in a tailored Chanel suit. She specialized in high-net-worth divorces and had a reputation for completely gutting cheating husbands. When I sat in her plush downtown office and laid out the situation, the secret debt, the forged second mortgage, the mistress on the payroll, she didn't give me pity. She gave me a terrifyingly predatory smile. "Victoria," Evelyn told me, tapping her manicured nails on the mahogany desk, "we aren't just going to divorce him. We are going to let him dig his own grave, and then we are going to hand him the shovel. But to do that, we needed hard, irrefutable proof of exactly how much debt he was hiding. That's where my second hire came in. A brilliant, borderline obsessive forensic accountant named Marcus. For the next 8 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the perfect, oblivious trophy wife. I hosted PTA bake sales, went to Pilates, and nodded sympathetically when Julian complained about how exhausting his business meetings were. I even let him buy me a ridiculous, overpriced diamond necklace for our anniversary, knowing full well the credit card he used was going to bounce in a matter of weeks. But by night, when Julian was conveniently working late, which I now knew meant he was at Brianna's luxury downtown condo, I was sneaking into his home office. I took high-resolution photos of every single document, every tax return, every bank statement, and every encrypted USB drive I could find. I sent it all to Marcus through a secure, encrypted email server I had set up on a cheap burner phone. What Marcus uncovered was actually worse than the initial FedEx audit. Julian had created a web of shady shell companies to hide the fact that Vanguard Elite Developments was hemorrhaging cash. He had defaulted on 3 major commercial loans. He was literally taking deposits from new investors just to pay the interest on the old loans, a classic textbook Ponzi scheme, and the second mortgage he took out on our family home. He had forged my signature so perfectly that the bank didn't even question it. We were mathematically millions of dollars in the red. "If this company goes under while you are still legally tied to it," Evelyn warned me over a secure phone call, "the creditors will come after you. They will take your grandmother's trust. They will take your son's college fund. They will bleed you completely dry." "So how do I get out?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. We don't just get you out," Evelyn replied smoothly. "We make him demand that you leave. We need him to voluntarily take 100% ownership of the company and all its liabilities in the divorce settlement. And to do that, we have to appeal to his biggest weakness, his ego." The plan was brilliantly twisted. I had to make Julian believe that Vanguard Elite was on the verge of a massive multi-million-dollar breakthrough, and that I was trying to steal his hard-earned success. We needed him to be so blindingly greedy, so eager to keep the imaginary profits all to himself that he would gladly sign away my name from the LLC just to get rid of me. So, I started dropping the bait. I began asking Julian annoying questions about the business again. I casually mentioned that since I was a 50% co-owner, I wanted to start attending board meetings. I told him I thought I deserved a larger cut of the incoming profits because I had helped him build the foundation. Predictably, he snapped. His narcissistic rage flared up exactly the way Evelyn said it would. The idea of me, his amateur housewife, trying to claim credit for his empire drove him absolutely insane. He started complaining to his friends, his colleagues, and inevitably to Brianna about how controlling and delusional I was becoming. I was painting myself as the villain in his story, and he was eating it up. He thought he was outsmarting me. He thought I was desperately trying to cling to his wealth. He had no idea I was literally setting the stage to hand him a ticking time bomb. I just needed one final push to make him file the papers. And ironically, he ended up doing the heavy lifting for me. It took exactly 3 weeks for Julian to swallow the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. The explosion happened on a Thursday night. He had just come home from another one of his networking dinners, reeking of expensive scotch and Brianna's sickeningly sweet Victoria's Secret perfume. I was sitting at the kitchen island, calmly sipping a cup of chamomile tea. I waited until he walked into the room before I casually mentioned that I had scheduled a meeting with Vanguard Elite's HR department for the following Monday to discuss my expanded role in the company. I watched his face cycle through 3 distinct emotions: confusion, panic, and finally, pure, unadulterated narcissistic rage. "You're doing what?" he snapped, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of our obnoxious kitchen. "I'm stepping up, Julian," I said, sigh keeping my voice perfectly level, channeling my inner gray rock. "I'm a 50% owner. I think it's time I start acting like it. I want to review the quarterly projections, and honestly, I think we need to cut some overhead. Like that marketing assistant, Brianna, what does she even do?" That was it. That was the nuclear launch code. Julian slammed his fist down on the marble countertop so hard my teacup rattled. "You are not stepping foot in my office, Victoria. You have absolutely no idea how high-level commercial real estate works. I built this empire with my blood, sweat, and tears, and you think you can just waltz in and play CEO? You're a stay-at-home mom. You're a liability." "I'm your partner," I pushed back, pretending to look deeply offended. "Half of that empire is mine." "Not anymore." He spat, his eyes cold and dead. "I'm done carrying dead weight. I want a divorce." There it was. He finally dropped the D word. My heart did a massive backflip in my chest, not out of sadness, but out of pure adrenaline-fueled excitement. The trap had officially snapped shut. But I couldn't let him see that. I forced my lip to quiver. I let a couple of carefully produced tears spill over my eyelashes. "Julian, no. Please. We can go to counseling. Think about Leo," I begged, putting on a performance that honestly deserved a golden statue. "I'm done, Victoria. I'll have my lawyers contact you." He stormed out of the kitchen, packed a duffel bag, and drove off in his leased Porsche, undoubtedly heading straight to his little downtown love nest. The very next morning, the legal assault began. Julian hired a notoriously sleazy, high-priced bulldog of an attorney named Richard. Richard was the kind of guy who wore suspenders, slicked his hair back, and specialized in bullying wives into settling for pennies on the dollar. Julian thought he was bringing a bazooka to a knife fight. He had no idea I already had a nuclear warhead named Evelyn waiting in the wings. 2 weeks later, we met for our first mediation session at Richard's obnoxiously modern downtown office. The tension in the conference room was thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Julian sat across from me, looking incredibly smug. He had his chest puffed out, radiating that toxic, alpha male energy, firmly believing he held all the cards. Richard kicked off the meeting by aggressively sliding a massive stack of papers across the polished glass table. "Let's cut to the chase," Richard barked, looking at me like I was something he scraped off the bottom of his shoe. "My client is the sole breadwinner and the driving force behind Vanguard Elite Developments. He is willing to offer you a very generous one-time alimony payout of $50,000. In exchange, you will sign over your 50% equity in the LLC, relinquish all claims to the Westlake property, and walk away quietly." I looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Richard, letting out a sharp, condescending laugh. 50 grand? For a company valued in the tens of millions? My client isn't signing away her life's work for pocket change, Evelyn fired back, playing her part flawlessly. She aggressively tapped her pen on the table. Victoria is entitled to half of the company's assets, half of the real estate portfolio, and the primary residence. Julian's face turned completely red. The veins in his neck were literally bulging. She didn't build Vanguard. I did. She just sat at home spending my money. I am not giving her half of my company. Then we will see you in court, and we will request a full, microscopic audit of every single corporate account, Evelyn said smoothly, leaning back in her chair. I saw a brief, terrifying flash of panic in Julian's eyes. A full court-ordered audit would instantly expose his massive debts, his Ponzi scheme maneuvers, and his embezzlement to fund Brianna's lifestyle. He couldn't risk a judge looking under the hood of his business. He needed to get me off the LLC's paperwork immediately, before the whole thing went up in flames. So he played his trump card, the lowest, most despicable move a father could make. "If you fight me on the company, Victoria," Julian snarled, leaning across the table and pointing a finger directly at my face, "I will drag you through the mud. I will hire the best child psychologist in the state to testify that you are an unstable, unfit mother. I will tie you up in a custody battle so expensive it will bankrupt you, and I will take Leo away from you. You will never see him." The room went dead silent. Even his own lawyer, Richard, looked a tiny bit uncomfortable. Using your own kid as a bargaining chip to protect your ego is a new level of evil. But for me, it was the green light I had been waiting for. I buried my face in my hands. I let out a loud, agonizing sob. I genuinely cried, not because I was scared of his empty threats, but because the sheer relief of knowing my plan was working was overwhelming. I looked up at him, my mascara running, and looking absolutely broken and defeated. "Please," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. "Please don't take my son. He's all I have left." Julian's smug smirk returned. He had won. He had successfully bullied the weak housewife into submission. "Then sign the damn papers, Victoria," he sneered. "Sign over the company. Sign over the house. Take your little $50,000 and get out of my life." I looked at Evelyn, acting incredibly hesitant. Evelyn put on an Oscar-worthy performance of a frustrated attorney. "Victoria, I strongly advise against this. You are giving up millions in potential equity. You are walking away empty-handed." "I don't care about the money," I sobbed, looking frantically at the settlement agreement. "I just want my son. I just want peace." With shaking hands, I pulled the document toward me. Let's talk about the fine print for a second, because this is where the magic happens. In standard, boilerplate divorce settlements regarding the transfer of a business, when one party assumes 100% ownership of an LLC, they don't just get the assets. They also assume 100% of the liabilities. Every loan, every mortgage, every single penny owed to every single creditor becomes their sole legal responsibility. Julian was so blinded by his greed, so obsessed with keeping the millions to himself, that he didn't even care about the liability clause. To him, the debts were just temporary cash flow issues. He thought he was brilliant. He thought he had just legally robbed me blind. I picked up the pen and scribbled my initials on the transfer of equity. I signed over the deed to the 6-bedroom Westlake mansion, the one with the secret, and a forged second mortgage that was about to go into foreclosure. I signed over the company cars. In return, the agreement stated I received 100% full legal and physical custody of Leo. No visitation requirements for Julian. He didn't even ask for them, which broke my heart for my son but secured our freedom. And a $50,000 cash transfer, which, ironically, Marcus the accountant had discovered was literally the last bit of liquid cash Vanguard Elite had before the accounts hit zero. "Are we done here?" I asked, wiping my fake tears and clutching my copy of the settlement to my chest like a life raft. Julian stood up, buttoning his custom-tailored suit jacket. He looked down at me like a king looking at a peasant. "We're done. Have your bags packed and be out of my house by the end of the week." I nodded meekly, out and keeping my eyes on the floor. As Evelyn and I walked into the elevator and the stainless steel doors slid shut, the heavy, suffocating atmosphere vanished. The fake tears dried instantly. I looked at my lawyer and she looked back at me. We both erupted into massive, uncontrollable smiles. "He actually signed it," Evelyn whispered, shaking her head in pure disbelief. "He just signed his own death warrant." "When do the banks find out he's the sole owner?" I asked, my heart racing with anticipation. Evelyn checked her Rolex. "The final decree will be signed by the judge on Friday at 9 a.m. By 9:05 a.m., I will personally fax the updated ownership documents to his creditors. And by 9:10 a.m., the bomb goes off. I had exactly 3 days to move my son out of that cursed house and set up the lawn chairs, because the greatest show on earth was about to begin. Friday morning, 9 a.m., Travis County Courthouse. The air in the courtroom was thick, stale, and completely devoid of warmth. I sat next to Evelyn at the plaintiff's table, wearing a simple, understated navy dress. I made sure to look appropriately subdued, the picture-perfect image of a defeated wife who had just lost everything. Across the aisle sat Julian. He was practically vibrating with arrogance. He wore a brand-new, custom-tailored Italian suit, a fresh blowout, and that massive Rolex gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. Sitting in the back row of the gallery, completely ignoring courtroom etiquette, was Brianna. She was scrolling through her phone, probably picking out new furniture for the Westlake mansion she thought she was about to move into. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the judge, a stern, no-nonsense older woman, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the massive stack of settlement papers we had submitted. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "I am reviewing this settlement agreement. You are assuming 100% ownership of Vanguard Elite Developments, as well as the primary residence in Westlake and the associated luxury vehicles. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Julian replied smoothly, leaning into the microphone. He couldn't help but shoot me a condescending little smirk. "I built the company, and I am fully prepared to take sole control of its future." The judge frowned slightly, flipping to the next page. "And you understand that by signing this decree, you are also assuming 100% of all corporate and personal liabilities attached to these assets. This includes all outstanding mortgages, commercial loans, credit lines, and pending vendor payments. Your ex-wife will be entirely indemnified from any and all debt." "I understand completely, Your Honor," Julian said confidently, waving his hand as if the debts were just a minor annoyance. "The business has tremendous cash flow. The liabilities are manageable." I practically had to bite through my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. "Manageable? Right. Very well," the judge sighed, clearly thinking I was making the biggest mistake of my life. "If both parties are in agreement, and the waivers have been signed, I am entering this divorce decree into the official record. You are officially divorced." Bang! The wooden gavel hit the sounding block. It was 9:05 a.m. Evelyn didn't waste a single millisecond. Underneath the table, hidden from the judge's view, she tapped a single button on her phone. It was a pre-scheduled, encrypted blast message to Marcus, our forensic accountant. That message was the green light. Instantly, Marcus forwarded the court-certified decree, proving Julian was now the sole owner and strictly liable party to the 3 major commercial banks Julian had defaulted on, and to the aggressive lender holding the forged second mortgage on the house. Julian stood up, buttoning his jacket. He turned to me, dropping his voice low so the judge couldn't hear. "Well, Victoria, it's been real. Don't spend that 50 grand all in one place. I need you completely out of the house by Sunday. Brianna and I are hosting a celebratory brunch." I didn't say a word. I just slowly stood up, gathered my purse, and waited. 9:08 a.m. Suddenly, the obnoxious buzzing of a cell phone shattered the quiet murmurs of the courtroom. It wasn't Julian's phone. It was Richard's, his high-priced bulldog attorney. Richard yanked the phone out of his pocket, looking annoyed. But as his eyes scanned the screen, the annoyance instantly vanished, replaced by a look of absolute unadulterated horror. "What is it?" Julian asked, looking annoyed. Richard didn't answer. He aggressively typed something on his phone, his hands physically shaking. A second later, his phone buzzed again. Then again. Then Julian's phone started vibrating wildly on the table. Bing, bing, bing. A rapid-fire assault of notifications. Julian picked up his phone. I watched his face like a hawk, completely memorizing the exact moment his soul left his body. It was a masterpiece. First, his smug smile faltered. Then, his jaw literally dropped open. The healthy, arrogant flush in his cheeks completely evaporated, leaving him looking as pale as a ghost. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a massive speeding 18-wheeler. "Richard!" Julian choked out, his voice cracking, completely losing that deep, alpha male resonance. "Richard, what is this? Chase Bank just sent an automated alert. They froze the corporate accounts. All of them." Richard looked up at Julian, his eyes wide with panic. "It's not just Chase, Julian. I just got an emergency email from the legal department at Texas Commerce. They are calling in the second mortgage on the Westlake house. They said the loan is in critical default. They're initiating foreclosure proceedings immediately. Foreclosure? Julian practically shrieked, totally forgetting where he was. The judge looked up, glaring at them. That's impossible. We have a grace period. We have the corporate credit lines. The credit lines are gone, Julian, Richard hissed back, aggressively shoving his iPad into Julian's chest. Look at this. The commercial lenders just triggered the liability clause. They were notified that the LLC transferred to a single guarantor. They ran an instant risk assessment and found massive discrepancies. You are over-leveraged by $6 million. They are seizing the assets. The house of cards didn't just collapse, it exploded into a million pieces. Because Julian had so arrogantly claimed 100% of the company. And because Evelyn had legally completely insulated me, the banks couldn't touch my grandmother's trust. They couldn't touch my son's college fund. They couldn't even touch the pathetic $50,000 he had given me. Every single penny of that crushing, life-destroying debt rested squarely and entirely on Julian's custom-tailored shoulders. He was bankrupt. He just didn't know it until this exact second. Julian slowly turned his head to look at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He suddenly remembered all those late nights I spent doing his books. He remembered the independent audit he thought he had hidden in his desk. He realized that I hadn't been fighting him for the company because I wanted it. I had been fighting him to force him to take it. You, he whispered, his eyes wide with pure, unfiltered terror. What, you knew. You set me up. For the first time in over a year, I completely dropped the gray rock act. I let the real Victoria step out of the shadows. I looked him dead in the eye, gave him the coldest, most victorious smile I could possibly muster, and leaned in close. I didn't set you up, Julian, I whispered sweetly. You dug your own grave. I just handed you the shovel. I turned to Evelyn, who was trying to hide a massive grin behind her briefcase. Are we finished here, Evelyn? We are officially done, Victoria, she said, practically gliding toward the exit. As I turned to walk down the aisle, Brianna stood up from the gallery, looking totally confused. Julian, babe, what's going on? Can we go look at the new furniture now? Julian didn't answer her. He just slumped down into his chair, burying his face in his hands as Richard frantically yelled into his cell phone, trying to stop a financial avalanche that was already destroying everything in its path. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the bright, warm Texas sunshine. I took a deep breath of fresh air. It was the smell of absolute unfiltered freedom. Checkmate. Tuyet voy, duoy jai la chong sao, chuang koi kung, kep lai tron ven kichban theo jong kao truk the resolution. Chuang nai setap trong vao susubjo tam he kwa gan chong, hao kwak sung jang. Kuok song mois vien marn kwa nu chin van hung by hok sao sek ve viek thiet lapran gyoy. Boundaries. Motiotukuk kian kach va de tausu jong kam trinkat ken Reddit stories kwa mai. Chapter Sao. The resolution, the aftermath of a rebirth. They say karma is a boomerang. But in Julian's case, karma was a runaway freight train loaded with dynamite. The fallout from that Friday morning in the Travis County Courthouse was absolutely biblical. By Monday, Vanguard Elite Developments was effectively dead in the water. The commercial lenders didn't just freeze his accounts, they completely dismantled his fake empire. They seized the leasing office. They repossessed the company cars, including the beloved Porsche Cayenne he loved to flex on Instagram. But the most satisfying part of the entire implosion was the Westlake mansion. Texas Commerce Bank moved so fast on the foreclosure of that forged second mortgage that Julian barely had time to pack his custom-tailored suits. And remember Brianna, the 23-year-old marketing assistant who thought she had just bagged herself a multimillionaire sugar daddy? Yeah. She lasted exactly 48 hours after the bank accounts hit zero. The moment she realized Julian couldn't pay the lease on her luxury downtown condo, she packed up her designer bags, stole his 2 remaining Rolexes from his nightstand, which I honestly thought was a hilarious touch, and completely ghosted him. She blocked his number, deleted her social media, and vanished into the wind. I guess mentoring wasn't as fun when the credit cards were declining at the drive-thru. Julian was left with absolutely nothing. His reputation in the Austin real estate market was radioactive. Nobody would touch him with a 10-foot pole. The high society friends from the country club who used to drink his expensive scotch suddenly didn't know his name. He ended up having to declare Chapter 7 personal and corporate bankruptcy, moving into a cramped, A dingy one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, ironically, very similar to the one we lived in when we first got married. Except this time, I wasn't there to clean up his messes or stroke his fragile ego. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Julian actually had the sheer, unmitigated audacity to call me. I was sitting on the porch of the beautiful, modest three-bedroom craftsman home I had bought for me and Leo using my grandmother's trust. It was fully paid off. No mortgages, no hidden debt, just peace. My phone rang, and an unknown number popped up. Out of pure curiosity, I answered. Victoria? His voice sounded raspy, defeated, and completely stripped of that arrogant alpha male bravado. It's Julian. Please don't hang up. What do you want, Julian? I asked, sipping my iced tea, my voice as calm and unbothered as a glassy lake. I have nothing, Vic. He practically sobbed into the receiver. The banks took everything. I'm drowning. I know I messed up. I know I lost my way. But we built that life together. You got out with the trust fund and the settlement cash. I'm the father of your son. You have to help me. Just a small loan to get me back on my feet. I closed my eyes and let the cool Texas breeze wash over my face. A year ago, the old Victoria would have felt an agonizing pang of guilt. The old Victoria would have rationalized his toxic behavior and tried to save him. But the old Victoria was dead. She died the day she found those audit papers. Julian, I said, my voice dripping with absolute unwavering finality. You didn't lose your way. You chose your path. You chose your ego. You chose your mistress, and you chose to use our family as collateral for your vanity. You wanted 100% of the empire. Well, congratulations. You got it. Do not ever call this number again. And then I hung up. I blocked the number. I went full no contact. It was the most empowering push of a button I have ever experienced in my entire life. I realized then that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I didn't hate Julian anymore. I just completely ceased to care if he existed. Today, life looks a lot different, and it's infinitely better. I used the rest of my grandmother's trust to open my own boutique financial consulting firm. It's small, it's entirely legitimate, and we operate with zero debt. I help small business owners, mostly women, manage their books, structure their LLCs, and protect their assets. I basically teach them how to bulletproof their lives so they never end up in the position I was in. Leo is thriving. Without the constant, suffocating pressure of his father's expectations, he's blossomed into a kind, funny, incredibly smart young man. He plays baseball because he loves it, not because it looks good on a Christmas card. We spend our weekends hiking, going to the movies, and actually talking to each other. He knows his dad made some bad business decisions and needed space, but I've protected him from the ugly truth. He'll know the whole story when he's older, but for now, he just knows he's safe and loved. If you are listening to this right now, and you are sitting in the dark, crying over a partner who gaslights you, manipulates you, and makes you feel like you are crazy, I need you to hear this. Narcissists are not invincible. Their power relies entirely on the illusion of control and your willingness to play their game. They want you to react. They want you to scream and cry because it makes them feel important. Don't give them that satisfaction. Become the gray rock. Protect your peace, secure your finances, and build your escape route in absolute silence. You need to establish ironclad boundaries. A boundary isn't about controlling the other person. It's about defining what you will and will not tolerate in your own life. And sometimes enforcing that boundary means letting them have exactly what they think they want, so they can choke on it. You are stronger than you think. You can rebuild. You can rise from the ashes of a toxic relationship and create a life that is so beautiful, so incredibly peaceful. That looking back will feel like watching a movie about someone else. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you've ever dealt with a narcissist, or if you've ever had to execute your own silent revenge, drop a comment down below. I read every single one of them. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay strong, know your worth, and never let anyone treat you like an option when you are the whole damn prize. Take care, everyone.